are you hearing voices? The guy said, yeah. The psychiatrist said, well, just ignore them. They're just hallucinations. So I brought that guy back a week later and I said, you remember I was in the psychiatrist's office with you when he told you to ignore the voices. I said, how's that going for you? He said, not well. He said, not well at all. He said they got louder when ignored. So I started asking the other patients, what happens when you ignore them? Consistently, they got louder, you know. So here we go again. Why would a hallucination get louder after sunset? Why would a hallucination get louder when ignored?
The Codega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his Codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with the Codega and sharing one of yours. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Codega's Codex of Curiosities. I'm Rye the Codega, your guide on this journey. And tonight is a very in-depth episode that hopefully, sends your world for a loop like it did mine. I'll be having Jerry Marzinsky on, and Jerry is he really dives deep into schizophrenia, mental illness, and where is it all coming from. We also go into the world of the pharmaceuticals and just throwing pills at things, which, you know me, I'm not for that. Something I'm still learning, get away from those pharmaceutical drugs because they're just masking. They're just hiding. They're not dealing with it. They are a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound that you need to deal with and heal. Okay. Now, during this conversation, Jerry brings up something called the MACE energy method. Now, what is that? Well, that is a way to deal with this. He's diving into schizophrenia, but schizophrenia people are showing the signs so much more of, call it almost a demonic possession, okay, of being attacked by these demonic forces from hell. Now, when he was describing all these patterns that come out from these, I was like, okay, yeah, like that one there. I've experienced that. I've experienced that. And I've experienced this. It's not saying I'm schizophrenic, but it's saying that, yes, I'm being subjected to these things as well. And as I think that we all are. So, of course, not take a pill, don't take a pill for it. And Jerry has a method to deal with this, which of course is the MACE energy method. And after the show, Jerry talked to me and he's like, hey, do you want to do a collab with this where I give you a free session and then we do a follow-up interview and you take notes after the session and we'll walk through and describe what happened. And I was like, yes, I'm in. I definitely want to give this a shot because then you, my listeners and viewers, get firsthand account of what this is like. Can it really help? Which I believe it can, and I'm going to find out. And yeah, I'm very excited about this interview, very excited about that session that we're going to have. And I think that, this is something that we should all be open to because maybe we are open to the wrong forces. We're open to these negative forces, these demeaning, these demented energies. We listen to them every day. We got to learn how to deal with it so that we can move past that and move forward. All right, let's get to the interview. All right, Jerry, welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities. I know we're having a little bit of issue there in the beginning trying to get you on. That seems to be technical difficulties always seem to happen when we have those touchy topics to talk about, especially this one.
That's common.
Is it ever? I've talked with many other individuals like Gary Wayne as well. We're talking about the Nephilim. And as soon as I bring in those people or we start talking about angels and demons, the technical difficulties just seem to arise constantly. And this is not an exception to that case as well. So
I'd say 90% of the time something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That delays it or sometimes knocks the whole thing out.
Yep. It's
I'm like, that almost happened today.
it's ridiculous. Yeah. Like I I, I was talking with another guest about a year ago, and during that time we were having some technical difficulties, and then I used to do my recordings out on my patio, and a bird flew and hit the wall and died just beside me. So it's you're getting these signs. It's kind of like you need to stop talking, but it's like that's all the more reason that we need to continue to talk.
Yes.
All right, Jerry. So why don't you give a little bit of introduction about yourself, and let people know where they can find you, and then we're gonna dive right into this.
Okay. Well, I've been working for over 45 years on the front lines of mental health, throughout the country. I've worked in virtually every kind of mental health setting there is. I've worked in private psychiatric hospitals. I've worked in uh, county psychiatric hospitals. I've worked in hospital emergency rooms for the last 10 years doing psych crisis. I started working at the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet back in the 70s. There were like 10,000 patients there when I first got there at Central State Hospital, Georgia. The place
Ten
was
thousand.
it was like a small town. There were 200 buildings there. So there was every form of mental illness known to man somewhere in there. So for somebody who was interested in mental illness, for me, it was like a candy store. It was like they were all there. I could see them all. Um,
Holy cow,
I,
that is huge. Because yeah, 10,000 does designate you as a city. Once you hit that 10,000 mark, you're a city. So you're at a pretty much a city
there
of
was a
of
notion of
mental work.
insanity.
Wow. And now
Uh,
were people segregated as in like this is your schizophrenia, this is your bipolar, or is it kind of just a free for
uh,
all?
no, it wasn't a free for all. I think they were different units, and I don't know how they had them set up. Well, I don't know if it was for regions or whether they mixed them all together. Um, but they were, for the most part, they were rooms. They had rooms, and they were able to lock a lot of those rooms or lock down the wards. Um, but I spent most of my time at two different units there.
Okay.
um,
And what became of that? So you are dropped into this world of mental illness, which I feel that like it's kind of running rampant in our world now. It's kind of like this diagnosed mental illness where we all have to accept other people's mental illnesses. Like it's kind of like people wear it as like a badge of honor almost now these days. And it's kind of like I'm just popping these meds, and you got to respect that I I'm this or I'm that. And
yeah, that's disgusting. That was one of the things that the British psychiatry people rebelled about when the American psychiatrists came up with their DSM, their Bible of mental illnesses. That whole DSM, it started out with 105 diagnoses back in the 50s, and now it's almost at 300. So
holy
these
cow,
people, there is not a single objective test for any of those almost 300 psychiatric diagnoses in that book. Not one. It's all subjective. It's all made up. It's categories of behavior, you know. And
that's
two-thirds of the
intriguing.
people who make these things up, they meet every few years. A bunch of psychiatrists get together, and I heard it's like a tobacco barn. They go in there and they go, "Oh, I got a new mental illness," and they all listen to it and go, "Well, can we make a med for that?" And if they think they can, it ends up in the DSM.
And
You
I'm
know,
sure they get some kickbacks for that as well. It's kind
oh,
of like,
I'm
yeah,
sure, I'm
yeah.
sure. So these are all subjective categories.
Hmm.
There is no test for any of them. There is no measurement for any of them. They're groups of clumped together behaviors, and then they call them a psychiatric disorder of some kind, and they just make them up.
Jeez. Okay. And what is your take on it then? Okay. So like I definitely think that the one that has always intrigued me the most, I think this is most intriguing, is schizophrenia,
Hmm. Yeah, that was the most intriguing for me too.
Okay. And one of those main things that always seems to come with it is the voices. Um, I often wondered about that. I'm like, are they truly just made up fantasy voices in their head, or are they
No.
coming from an outside source?
Well, see, that's what I thought. When I finished graduate school, they said, oh, these things are auditory hallucinations. So when you think about hallucinations, you just think of garbage. It's like, okay, it doesn't make any sense. They're hallucinating. They're out of it. They're out of touch. It wasn't like that. You know, I went in there believing that. And then I started seeing patients with a schizophrenic diagnosis carrying on long, sometimes heated, coherent conversations with something or someone I couldn't see. So the impression I got, it was like when you're looking at somebody talking on a telephone, but you can't hear what's coming in from the telephone, but you can hear the person's answers, right? And those answers were logical and coherent. They were arguing or talking to something or somebody that I couldn't see or hear, right? And it wasn't word cabbage. It wasn't word salad like I thought it would be because they put, schizophrenia, auditory and verbal hallucinations, you know?
Yeah, you would make an assumption that these people are crazy and they're just
Yeah.
just like spouting off words, and like you said, like a word salad kind of thing, and you're like, you're making no sense. But what you're saying is they're having a conversation, someone's on the other line, you can't hear them,
Yes.
but it is coherent, clear, and they're almost making sense to what they're
Well,
saying.
they are making sense. I remember one gal who was, it was an older lady. She was schizophrenic, hearing voices, and they were telling her that she needed to leave the hospital. So she was outside during recreation, and here she is walking off the hospital grounds, arguing with her voices that she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds while she was walking off the hospital grounds. Right? Um,
So what you're saying is that something else is almost controlling her, like compelling her to, like, I don't know, she's like, I don't want to go, but something else is
yes,
moving her off these
moving her
hospital
off
grounds.
off the hospital grounds. You know,
Wow.
um, what I hated about studying psychology is you couldn't verify virtually anything they were teaching. You know, especially in the clinical areas. So I took abnormal psych, and here's all these descriptions of all these mental illnesses that I'd never seen a one of. You know, so they're sounding fascinating, but they never put what you could do or what should be done about them in any of the abnormal psychology books. They were just classifications of what they thought were different mental illnesses. Right?
I'm sorry, but this sounds like almost like paranormal talk when you're like, yeah, this is this type of ghost. What can you do about it? Nothing. Okay, we got this. We have like this reoccurring thing here. What can you do about it? No, nothing. That's just what it is. And
Yeah,
you can't
yeah.
do
Well,
anything about this.
their thing to do about it was drug these guys silly.
Okay.
So where this drugging stuff started was in the late 1980s, after the release of Prozac. It was Eli Lilly, the drug company, came up with the idea of a chemical imbalance. They needed something to make people think they knew what caused depression and schizophrenia. So
Okay.
they came up with this chemical imbalance theory. They're thinking, oh, well, our drugs somehow affect the serotonin, so it must be some kind of imbalance. So they put that out as if it were the truth. So, Peter Brigham in 1991, he wrote the book Toxic Psychiatry, said the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. There was no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any chemical imbalance. Same with schizophrenia, but Lilly ran with it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that mental disorders are caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain.
So
It's a
this
total crop of crap.
So this was
There
like
is
a
no
marketing.
evidence for it at all. Yes,
This
it
was
was a
like a
marketing
marketing
scheme.
slogan, and people ran with it and took it as like, this is it.
Yeah, and they started teaching it in the universities on top of that, all paid off by the drug companies.
Of course. Don't get me started with that one. Yes, that makes so much sense. The chemical imbalance is huge, and it's like I just got to take a drug for the rest of my life that will balance it all then, because not like treating the root cause or trying to solve the problem. We'll just take a pill and I'm good to go.
Well, that's what they want you to believe.
Hmm.
But the thing is, anybody who is suspicious about that. One thing I saw working at the state hospital. So here they are. You ask the psychiatrist, "Hey, what's going on?" They'll tell you, "Well, it's a chemical imbalance." That's what they were programmed to believe in medical school.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you ask, "Hey, well, I've never seen you take a baseline. I've never seen you give any kind of lab test or drug test or blood test or any kind of objective test to determine which of the 200 or so neurotransmitters in the brain are out of balance or by how much." I said, "What's the deal?" Oh, and the psychiatrist I asked, he said, "Oh, we let the drug companies determine that. We just dish out the drugs." And I'm like thinking in my head, because they're so arrogant, thinking in my head, you got to be freaking kidding. You let the drug companies tell you which drugs to administer for what, and you don't have a baseline. I said, how do you know when when it's balanced? How do you know when this chemical balance imbalance is balanced? They don't. There is no test for it. It's
You
a
don't have
crock
a
of
clue.
crap.
Ugh,
They don't have a clue. It's a lie. It's a total lie that they perpetuated on the entire planet.
wow. Yeah. This
It's
is
disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. They should be locked up for that.
I could not agree more. And I like that you're saying like, what's the baseline? Like, let's see these levels. Like it's like checking the fluid levels in your car. You can check it. Okay, here we go. Oh, I need to top this on up. I need to top this up. You can visually see it. But here it's kind of like it's a guessing game, and we're just going to let
Yeah,
the manufacturer tell us the manufacturer who wants to sell us more oil or more windshield washer fluid or something like that. Just keep putting more in, put more in,
yeah.
and
That's what they do. They either increase it or add more drugs to it, you know, or add multiple drugs until the guy turns into a zombie. You know, their big concern in the psychiatric hospital was to keep these people under control. Keep them drugged up enough so they didn't hurt themselves or anybody else.
okay,
And there were a number of them walking around like zombies. You know, they had what they called the Thorazine shuffle, where they wouldn't actually walk like you walk. They just dragged their feet along because they couldn't lift their legs. You know, and then when they started doing autopsies on these people, especially the schizophrenics who'd been given these antipsychotic drugs for years in the state hospitals, when they did autopsies, they saw their brains were shrunk like walnuts. And so the researchers published that. I don't know how they got it out because, if the psychiatric mafia or big pharma, which controls these journals, they control what gets into these journals and what doesn't, and they have no problem threatening, colleges and universities that if you publish this kind of stuff, we're no more money for you.
yeah, pull that
You
funding.
know?
Yeah,
But that did get out. And when it got out, they went nuts. They went, no, no, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia that's doing that. You know, the mysterious schizophrenia. It's doing something weird again, just like the
it's the
voices.
genetics. It's the
No,
genetics.
they
It's
started
nothing
with
to do
that.
with us.
No, they started with that first. The
Okay,
genetics came first. But before the genetics, they were blaming mothers. They said, oh, mothers are doing something to their kids. They're raising them wrong, and that's causing schizophrenia. And the mothers would go, well, what did we do? Well, I didn't do anything to cause this stuff. So that was, you could see what the mothers were doing. I mean, it was observable. So they had to kick it up somewhere where it wasn't observable so they could keep their fantasy going and they could keep selling drugs with their lies. So they kicked it up into genetics. They said, oh, it's got to be a genetic abnormality of some kind. You know, so they kick it up there where, you in order to examine that, you've got to be a geneticist. So it rules out 99.9% of the human population from taking a look at what's actually going on. And then you have to wait until some geneticists came along who were actually interested in investigating schizophrenia. So they got away with that for a decade or more. Saying, "Oh, it's genetics. We don't. We think it's genetics." And then when they couldn't find a genetic marker, then they went, "Well, it's not just one gene; it's a whole clump of genes, and they're all mixed together. And sooner or later we'll find them, but right now we haven't. But we know it's genetics. No, they never found one. The geneticists never found a genetic marker for any mental illness. You know, so they had to come up with something else. To keep their crap going,
To keep the sales
and
up.
to keep the sales up. And those sales are horrendous. Over $50 billion a year are being paid for psychiatric medications today, and none of them are curing anything. They're just treating symptoms.
Treating the symptoms.
They're
This is
treating
something.
the symptoms.
Yeah, it's just we're going to put a Band-Aid on it, and we'll let you keep bleeding for the rest of your life, but we got that
That's right.
Band-Aid on. Yeah.
Well, they do even worse than that. They hide the bleeding. So what I saw at the state hospital is when they started experiencing the neurological symptoms symptoms of neurological damage, the shaking and the tongue darting and the like that, the face quivers, and then they started giving Cogentin to mask that while the damage continued. So the patient wasn't any longer experiencing it. The neurological damage was progressing, until they were dysfunctional, totally dysfunctional.
Just one on top of the other, like I don't know, like a house of cards almost, just to keep hiding the next one and hiding the next one.
Yeah,
It's
just keep them drugged up and out of trouble.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. And like, don't get me wrong. I understand that there are some people who are dangerous with some of these mental illnesses,
Yes.
and things need to be dealt with. Perhaps maybe the drug is just kind of like, okay, keep them calm. Now let's deal with this core issue, which I'm not even sure I agree with that, but like as in drugging them still. But I think like these issues need to be dealt with. Now,
Yes. And they're not dealing with them. They
okay,
don't talk to these people. For the vast majority of psychiatrists that I worked with, and there were scores of them over the years, they wouldn't spend hardly any time with these people. In the state hospital, they spent 15 to 20 minutes a month with them. And the questions were, how are your drugs working? You're still hearing the voices. And if they complained about the voices, that was an automatic add another drug or increase the prescription until you turn into a zombie. So what the patients learned was you just don't tell the psychiatrist that you're hearing voices, because he will increase your medicine and turn you into the zombie. So one of the things I saw when I first it was within the first several months that I started working at the state hospital. I was assigned to a psychiatric unit that had it was 3 floors high, and there was a metal stairwell. It was like a pipe that was attached to the wall that served as a banister, you know, and it was a metal pipe about, that big around, and there were caps. On the bottom, there was a cap. On the top, I noticed there wasn't a cap. It was open. All right. And I didn't think anything of it. I went, all right, this one doesn't have a cap. I noticed that it didn't have a cap, and that was about it. I didn't think anything more of it. Then one day I was walking through the bottom floor, and here was a maintenance man cutting the bottom cap off of the bottom end of that banister that ran up to the second floor. Right. So that was the most exciting thing going on at the time. And there was a group of patients standing there watching all the fireworks from the grinder and the smoke and the sparks flying all over the place. So I just jumped in there and joined them, and I was watching it with them. We were all having a good time watching the sparks flying from the grinder. And when that cap fell off and hit the floor, bang, out of that banister came a gush of multicolored pills, thousands of them,
I
just
was thinking that
gushing
was, yeah.
out of that banister. There were decades of pills being dropped down that banister, and they just kept coming out and coming out and coming out. There were thousands of them. They must have been dumping them in there for decades. And I bent down and I looked, and a great number of them were antipsychotic drugs. So I'm like, why are they doing that? That's the only thing keeping them sane, right? So what those drugs do, they worked mostly because they were major tranquilizers. They calmed the person down. So once the paranoia died down, they were able to function a lot more normally. Okay. They were at least able to function, but with the paranoia screaming and the voices screaming very strong, it was very difficult for them to function, so they could hold a low level job if they took their meds, they would be functional, but virtually all of them would go off their meds at one point or another, and you go, I'd ask them every time they went off their meds. I'd ask them, well, why did you go off your meds? Because it was the only thing keeping them sane, keeping them functional. And they would go, well, the side effects were awful. I couldn't stand them anymore. Okay. And the side effects were awful. I mean, for Thorazine, it was dizziness, drowsiness, anxiety, sleep problems, insomnia, breast swelling or breast discharge, changes in menstrual period, weight gain, swelling of the hands or feet, dry mouth, stuffy nose, blurred vision, constipation, shakiness. Uh, what else? It was uncontrolled muscle movement in the face, lip smacking, frowning, tongue darting, eye movement, stiffness of the neck, tightness of the throat, trouble breathing, lightheadedness, feeling like you might want to faint, confusion, agitation, feeling jittery, trouble sleeping, weakness, seizures, jaundice, low white blood cell count. It goes on and on and on and on. Drowsiness, constipation, impotence, um, all
Just
this with
this huge list, and so many people overlook. I don't want to say side effects. It's almost poisoning is kind of what it is. It's poisoning.
It is poisoning. It is poisoning. Yes. These are toxic effects of these psychiatric drugs, or poisonous abnormal effects. So these people are being poisoned, and their neurological system is being rotted out by these antipsychotic drugs. Right now, the newer ones they have weaker side effects. So the improvements in these, they call them, what do they call them? They're the new generation of psychiatric drugs. I forget they got a name for them.
Okay.
I forgot what it was though. But all they do is the side effects aren't as strong. They're still there.
Okay.
They're not as strong. All right. So these, these they get worse and worse with time. Right. So looking down at that, I'm like, it makes sense that they wouldn't want to take those drugs.
Are they called SGAs, second generation antipsychotics, or atypical antipsychotic?
Atypical antipsychotic. So they're not the typical stelazine, thorazine, that kind of stuff, the first generation of phenothiazines. But, they are toxic. Right? But from what I saw, being psychotic was much worse because they didn't always have all of these side effects. Each person had different side effects. They had them to different extents, but they weren't all of them.
Maybe it was depending on your chemical imbalance and how you reacted with that.
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
It depended on the different ones. But there were a lot of these side effects, and the psychiatrist wouldn't tell them about the echinacea. They wouldn't tell them about the most dangerous ones, the shaking, the tongue darting, the neurological damage that results with long-term use. I never, ever saw one psychiatrist tell a psychiatric patient of the damage that these things could do to them long-term, or to watch out for these effects and to let them know them. Never.
Now,
so,
I will say I've heard that before. I've heard that before, where you are administered a drug, a concoction, an injection, and you are never told about the side effects, the long-term side effects. It's just, here, take this. It'll do you good, and they'll never tell you. And I don't like the word side effects. I prefer the poisoning. This is how you could
Toxic
be poisoned.
effects.
Yeah, these
Yes.
toxic effects. Now, I want to circle back to, so they're taking these antipsychotics because they're acting psychotic, right? What do you believe the psychosis is really? Is there an underlying thing that you are and I know you can't say like outright like, yes, 100% this is it, or maybe you can. I'd love to hear that of what you believe this is.
Well, there's a one-to-one correlation between having schizophrenia and severe psychological, physical, or emotional or sexual abuse. All right. So there's a basis of trauma, that kind of underlies it all. All right. And then on top of that, there are the voices. Okay. And probably for the first 25 years that I started studying these things, I didn't know what they were. You know, here's psychiatry saying they're, auditory hallucinations, but they didn't look like hallucinations to me from what little I could get from the patients. So I'd ask the different staff. I'd say, what are these voices? And 90% of them would go, they're just hallucinations. Just blow them off. Don't pay any attention to them. They're due to a chemical brain imbalance, which is a lie. They were all brainwashed that way. The entire hospital, hundreds of staff, all brainwashed with that crap. And they haven't done one experiment at all on the voices. None. They haven't done any research on them at all. They went, oh, they look like hallucinations. So it's like the psychiatrist and big pharma go, like the Egyptian priests of old. We're the psychiatrists. We're the authorities. We say they're voices. They're hallucinations, and you better believe it because we're the authorities. It's a bunch of crap. If they looked into them, they'd see they were running patterns. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations because hallucinations don't run predictable, repeatable patterns. Right? So that's what I started seeing, these patterns. The more I started asking these patients about their voices, and the voices don't want you asking about them. So they'll tell, I had one guy tell me, the voices are telling me not to tell you anything because you already know too much. Yeah,
Wow.
that came out.
And when you're saying patterns, you're saying like unrelated patients
Yes,
are producing, or they're
the
hearing the
same
same.
patterns.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yes, and not only that, they're hearing the same patterns here in Arizona as they were hearing in Georgia and all these other mental hospitals that I worked in between. And now that I'm working worldwide, and with the MACE energy method, a cutting edge energetic psychotherapy, those patterns are the same worldwide.
I love to hear what these patterns are. Like you said, don't talk to him. He knows too much. Where do we go from there then?
Well, the first pattern I noticed was that they were consistently negative all the time. They never said anything good. It's like, you're ugly, you're stupid, nobody likes you, your parents despise you, your girlfriend is going to leave you, your girlfriend is cheating on you, your boyfriend's cheating on you. Every disgusting insult that you could think of is what they were telling these people. You're worthless, you're no good, you're stupid. You know, um, it was totally consistent. They were consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. You know, they usually start out by like, oh yeah, we're spiritual helpers. And if the person buys into that, then sooner or later they turn on them.
So you open the
And
door, and
you
and
open the door.
would you think that the abuse that had happened earlier on in their life was kind of like a beacon, like they were
Yes,
now marked, or
yes.
I would say marked,
To,
yeah, and that's
to,
kind of like a magnet almost for this negative energy to approach them.
Yes, and what they're watching for is a source of negative energy, is what they feed off of, right? And that's why they're so negative. They want to produce that negative emotional energy in all of us, you know. But if you believe what they say, then they got you. So they're like fishermen. They bait the hook, they throw it in front of you, and if you bite on it, oh, you're worthless, you're stupid. Oh yeah, my dad told me that too, or my mom told me that too, so it must be true. You bite on that, they got you. And then they start feeding you more crap. They want to generate that negative emotional energy, and that's their food source. And what I noticed at the state hospital was that after the voices attacked these people, their energy level went down to nothing. A lot of them couldn't even get out of bed, but they didn't even notice that until I brought it up. Right? Because they were feeling so bad anyway. So you got this storm raging in their head. They feel physically drained. They can't sleep. They have trouble eating. They're feeling awful because of the side effects of the medicine. So they got all this rotten stuff going on. They're not paying attention to their energy level. They just go, "Oh, I just feel bad." You know. But when you bring that up, hey, how much energy did you have before the voices came? And how much energy do you have after the voices came? They'll tell you I had much less afterward. Okay. Now, um, I didn't finish that. One of those earlier thoughts I had. Not taking the meds. Um, yeah, there was a 1-to-1 correlation too. These people would eventually go off their meds. And when they put them back on their meds, I would bring them into my office and ask them, why did you go off your meds? They said, first thing they said, side effects, you know, understandable. But then from what I saw, being psychotic was much worse than any of those side effects. They were hearing voices telling them all kinds of ugly stuff, and that they would actually move outside of their heads at times, and they'd hear that voice from a physical spot outside of their heads, like something invisible talking to them, instead of like a thought, where they usually come across as negative thoughts, right? And uh, so there was one gal, she was doing good in cosmetology class at the hospital, and she went off her meds a third time. She was about to graduate. She had sabotaged herself, and I called her mother. I said that was the third time. If they go off 3 times, we would discharge them, because if they're not going to take their meds while they're being handed to them in the hospital, they're certainly not going to take them when they have to go to a mental health center and go through a lot of trouble to get them. Right. So we would discharge them and then put somebody in that slot who we thought would stay on those meds. So I had to call her mother and say, listen, we got to discharge her. She went off the third time. That's it. She was given 2 warnings before. She did it again. We're going to have to let her go. And the mother just begged me, please don't do that. I can't deal with her. She needs something to keep her occupied. And she said, I'll come up there and we'll find out why she went off her meds. Now, I'd failed in doing that for 3 years prior. So I went, okay, I got the help of a mother. Yes, I'll take it.
Let's give it a shot. Yeah.
I'll give it a shot. So I said, come on up. So there was one Friday afternoon. She came up. We brought the patient in, and both of us, the mother and me, is like, tell us, why did you go off your meds again? You knew what happened. You go nuts. You knew you were going to get discharged. Why did you do this? And she said, you won't believe me. And I told her, I said, try me. I've heard some really wild stuff since I've been here. I don't think you're going to do anything that's going to throw me out of kilter. you know. And she says, the voices told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me and pointed to the side effects of these medications as the results of being poisoned. And it was true.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So another thing I noticed when I first got to this big hospital, now we didn't have cell phones back then. It was in the 70s. All right. So we had the dial-up phones. So everybody got together at what they called the central kitchen. So this big hospital was in the middle of nowhere. It was 30 miles from Macon, Georgia. There weren't any grocery stores there. There weren't any big stores. There was nothing there. It was a small town centered around this big hospital. So where was I going with that?
That one I don't know. That one I don't know.
What was my last one? Oh, yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
talking about
Okay.
the phone, and yes,
Yeah, so she said it was the voices that told me to do that. So in the hospital cafeteria, we would hear, maybe once a month, once every 2 months, of a schizophrenic attacking a psychiatrist. They were getting attacked more than any of the other staff, more than the psych nurses, more than the regular nurses, more than the dentists, more than the regular doctors, more than the psychologists, more than counselors. They were being attacked at a
so
rate equal.
there's a pattern there as well.
Another pattern there as well. They were being attacked at a rate for spending 15 to 20 minutes a month with these people at a rate equal to that of attendant staff who were with them 24 hours a day. And that made no sense to me until I heard this girl tell me the voices told me not to take those pills because they're poisonous. That's what was happening to the psychiatrist. I think the voices were doing the same thing, telling him, this guy's poisoning you, knock the crap out of him. He's trying to kill you. All right. I think that stands behind that. So, the suicide rate for schizophrenics was 3 to 5 times that of the general population, right? Much higher than the general population. The suicide rate of psychiatrists is right up there with them.
Really,
Really.
that's
3
intriguing.
to 5 times that of the general population also. And these are the high priests of mental health in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, these are the people that are running our mental health system.
And they
And you
are
look
having
at what's
mental
happening.
breakdowns themselves.
Yeah, and you look what's happening. There's 50,000 suicides in the United States every year, year after year after year after year. There was only 50,000 people killed in the Vietnam War. But this is year after year after year. 50,000 people in the U.S. are killing themselves. A good many of them on psychiatric drugs, antipsychotics and antidepressants. And the antidepressants, some of them have warning suicidal ideation. And you look at these Fruit Loops that are, these transvestite whatevers that are killing, mass murdering people. A lot of them are on depressant drugs.
Yep, yep. I I I I know a friend who is on ADHD medication, and the transformation that I've seen in this person is ridiculous. It
Ritalin.
is ridiculous. I'm no longer talking and communicating with this person anymore because they've gone off the deep end.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them give schizophrenics that stuff. It's amphetamine.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dexedrine, Adderall, Ritalin.
Yeah.
I've even seen prisoners that started off on that stuff and they just kept going. They go, "Oh yeah, it was such a high. I just went out and got some off the street and started using that." And then they started robbing people and beating people up, and they end up in prison.
Yeah. I would say the actions that I've seen this person taking are like the common sense is gone. The radicalization of this person has really been apparent. They become very radical in their beliefs and their thinking. And I know it was kind of the last little bit that we were talking was, no, this is who I truly am. I was just hiding it before. And somehow I doubt that, but there was a lot of abuse that you were talking about that prior to this happening. She I'm not going to give out any names, but she told me about her obsession with contacting Baphomet and having him possess her when she was young. So this is that, and
That'll do it. You invite them in, man. They're right there.
yes, yeah, and it almost seems like maybe she was keeping them at bay until using these drugs, and then she lost that control, and the takeover happened.
Well, you invite them in. They're there. They won't.
Yeah.
They won't turn that down.
No, exactly. That's exactly it. Now, so these voices, then, I know before we started the cameras rolling, you were talking about archons. Is that what you believe these voices are? These things, these creatures, these beings are, your spiritual guides of sorts.
Well, they're not spiritual guides. They're out to destroy you.
Yeah. Yes.
They want to make your life as miserable and traumatic as they possibly can because they want that loosh. They want that negative emotion generated because that's what they feed off of. And the more negative emotion they can generate, the happier they are. So you look at this war in Ukraine right now. That's a hog's trough for these things. They're just stuffing themselves over there. With all this misery and also with they hate children. So you look at until Trump got in, the U.S. was one of the biggest child traffickers in the world. They you didn't even need all you needed is an address where to deliver these kids from the border. There was no vetting going on whatsoever. They go, I'll just send them to this address, and they do it.
And this is
thousands and
this is
thousands.
something where a lot of people don't talk about. They believe I don't want to get too much into this, but illegal immigration, there's a much further, deeper, darker part to this. It is these children coming across that aren't with their parents. They aren't coming across with family. They're being trafficked across. And there is some nefarious people in what you see in the movies, and sometimes it's only just a tip of the actual iceberg of what truly is out there and the vileness that's there. And I think maybe people don't want to believe it. They're like, I watched it on movie and that's all there is. That's not really happening, but this is what's truly happening in this world right now.
It is. And these voices hate kids. They hate them.
And is it
they will
because
do
kids
whatever.
are like pure? Is that because they're a pure?
I think that's what it is. They can't stand kids. They want to do all the damage they can to the kids. A woman who is schizophrenic and has a little kid, I worry about that. When they used to come into the ER, there were times where I had to call Child Protective Services because I was afraid they would hurt that kid. And I don't think there's a genetic marker or a biochemical imbalance thing. There is a tendency for children of schizophrenics to also become schizophrenics. And I remember talking to a guy he was brilliant. He was a computer guy, and his mother was schizophrenic. He said, I had to move away from her because I started hearing the voices also. He said, I had to get away from her.
Wow. So it's like by association almost, or do you
think the way they're treated? They treat them in a way, and it's abuse. It's abusive. They treat them in a way that makes it's like planting a garden. You put the fertilizer in there and the potting soil and that kind of stuff. So then they start feeding it. And it's always negative stuff. So there were 23 patterns that came out of this, which are the operational definition.
Let's go back to these patterns. Yes.
All right. So the first one was negativity. So I saw they were consistently negative. They never said anything positive. So it was like a straight line path. They didn't diverge from it. They didn't say anything neutral. They didn't say anything good. They didn't say anything in between. It was always negative. So it was like I started thinking, what holds them on such a negative path? Why don't they diverge from that path? How come it's a straight line like a bullet? Why doesn't it diverge? Why doesn't it blend? I mean, it's always negative, consistently, predictably negative. Right. And I talked to hundreds of schizophrenics, and they always said the voices are negative. They tell them, you're no good, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're worthless, you're every rotten thing you can think of. That's what they're hearing. And, if they're hearing a bunch of voices, it sounds like a crowd. It sounds like a crowd in a stadium. You hear, all these voices talking, which is really unnerving. And then if they all attack at once, that's hell on earth. So the other thing is that I found, the second one was that they're anti-religious. You know, I had one patient come to me in the state hospital. He said, I started hearing the voices last night, and I prayed the 23rd Psalm, and he said they reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. And I went, well, ain't that interesting?
Right.
So what I started doing is handing out the 23rd Psalm to some of my other patients and saying, hey, repeat this when the voices show up. And in in virtually all cases, they said the voices hated it. They wanted them to shut up, to stop the prayer, saying they said stuff like, what makes you think Jesus is going to help you? He couldn't even help himself. You know, stuff like that. They reacted against it. The next thing I knew is that the preacher had ice cream socials at the psychiatric rehab center where I was working. The second half of my tenure at that hospital. Um, and the schizophrenics never went down to the party. So they had ice cream, they had cake, they had dancing, they had a little sermon. The schizophrenics never went. you know. And I noticed that one day, and I went, "Well, that's odd. Every single schizophrenic on the ward is on the ward. They're not down at the with the chaplain."
Getting some free ice cream and some free cake,
Yeah, yeah. And I saw that a second time, and I went, "That's odd." They were watching murder mysteries on television or reading, war books or something like that. And third time, I started asking questions about it. Why aren't you down there with these other guys? Oh, well, I prayed to God a bunch of times and he never helped me. So I don't think there is a God. I think the preachers are full of crap and they don't know what they're talking about. It was always negative, anti-religious stuff. Just, you know, so I started asking them, have you ever gone to church while you were hearing the voices? And I think a lot of them figured out, there's something wrong. The church might help. So they go to church to see if it'll help. What I found is that if the voices were very weak, they would shut up when the patient went to church. If they were moderate in strength, they would get louder and they would detract from the preacher.
from what's
So
being okay.
from what's being said. So they would block out what was being said. So the person couldn't hear what he was saying. If they were very strong, the person would actually get up and run out of the church like his pants were on fire. Just get up and run. So there were three categories. The biggest category was the one where they interfered with what the preacher was saying, but they didn't like the person reading the Bible at all. They didn't want them reading any spiritual positive material at all. Why would a hallucination do that?
Right.
Do
Yeah.
you know a hallucination that would do that
Nope.
consistently?
Yeah, that's the thing, is consistently. If you got one hallucination, one's like, oh, this is not letting me read the Bible, and then you have someone else saying, oh yeah, it's telling me to read the Bible all the time, but this is consistent.
Consistent and repeatable, anti-religious.
This is
Second,
scientific.
second set pattern, right? Third, they foster and create negative emotion. The voices consistently work toward the creation of a prolonged negative emotional state in their victims, including anger, anxiety, paranoia, guilt, shame. And they do this through the insertion of negative thoughts about the person and others around them into their thought stream. They tell the patient to do stuff that will get them in trouble with others, right? So they insert these thoughts into the victim's thought stream. And they sound, for the most part, just like the tens of thousands of other thoughts that go through their head on a regular day. Only the content and the intent are very different. They're negative. Another thing they can do is because they're energetic. So your thoughts are energy, your feelings are energy, your spirit is energy. Everything about you is energy. You're this energetic being driving this body, which is like a car. So the true you is energy, right? These things are energy also. So they can enter into your mind and they can see all the rotten things you've ever done and they can turn them against you. They'll go, you remember when you did this to this guy? you're a rotten person, or you shouldn't have said that. Now what are they thinking? Or they're laughing at you behind your back, or they're plotting against you. It sounds just like all your other thoughts, but look at the content. It's always negative. And there's a disappearance. So what I did one day is I started asking these guys. Said I came up with a 1 to 10 scale, just basic little experiment. How much energy do you have 1 to 10 before the voices attack? How much energy do you have 1 to 10 after they attack? Consistently, they had much less energy after the voices attacked them than they did before the voices came. Right? So we ran an analysis of variance on that after I had like 25 or 30 of those things, and it was statistically significant. Something was going on. Their energy was disappearing, and they had no idea where it was going.
Something was it's
Something
taking.
was. It looked like the voices were draining them. But see, they didn't notice that because they were having the side effects of the meds. All that rotten stuff happening there. Then they were paranoid and anxious, and they had all that rotten stuff blowing through their head. They were feeling bad on top of that. So they didn't notice that their energy was being gone. It just was one of the bad things that were happening to them until it was pointed up. And then, think back. I tell them, think back after the voices come. How much energy did you have left? Then they would see it. But the voices would start getting upset at that point. They go, hey, you need to get out of here. You need to leave. Don't tell him anything more. And it turned out that there was a 1-to-1 correlation between the voices showing up and their energy leaving. Okay. So they didn't see that until I pointed it out to them. And then I go, okay, after the voices, you've heard the voices thousands of times over the years. And each time you've heard them, your energy level dropped to nothing. Where do you think your energy went? They would say, I don't know. They didn't know. They couldn't make that leap. So I said, well, if you were sitting next to a fire and you stuck your fist in that fire 1,000 times, what's burning you? They had no trouble saying the fire. No trouble. Every single one of them got the fire. I said, well, if the voices came 1,000 times and every time they came, your energy was depleted, where do you think your energy went? I'd say 90% of them would go, I don't know. There's 10% would go, the voices took it? I went, yeah, that's what it looks like. And the voices would get very upset when they were told that. They didn't like them knowing that at all. It was like if you had a large leech on you and somebody told you you had a leech on you, and then you tried to pull it off and that leech got mad. It's going to cut deeper into you. It's not wanting to come off.
Now, I don't want to take us on a different path, like straight from what we're talking about here, but by you saying that, I'm assuming mainstream was not happy with you.
I had to keep under their radar constantly.
Yes.
I did get in trouble in the later part when I was working at the state prison in the psychology department. When they saw, or when the chief psychologist saw that schizophrenics were completely recovering and going off their medications and not showing any signs of psychosis, that alarmed them. I thought they would be happy about that. They weren't. What's he doing in there? He's doing something in there. We don't like it. We don't know about it. Whatever it is, he doesn't have our permission to do it. So the chief psychologist was trying to gig me for a whole year. He brought me up in front of this inquisition, and I didn't give him any information, and the patients I worked with didn't give him any information either. They wouldn't tell him anything about what we were doing. And that pissed them off even worse. So he brought me up on this inquisition in front of the medical director and, told the medical director, well, he's doing something in there and we're being told that schizophrenics are recovering and that's not possible. So we don't know what he's doing and these people are going off their medications, and the medical director said, well, if their voices are gone, if they're straight, they're normal, that's saving us money, so leave them alone. And he was furious. On the other hand, he told me, he said, you better do what he tells you, or, you're going to be in trouble too. So I got away with it for another year. But as soon as the medical director left, that guy was back on me like a duck on a June bug. I thought they'd be happy that these people were actually recovering. And they found that they were recovering because during their little investigation, they would pull the guys out who recovered. And there was one guy who had a valid MMPI, the gold standard psychology test, showing that when he entered the prison, he was psychotic as a bedbug. Right? After he recovered, the one of the psychologists who was checking into this, he asked him, what's he doing in there with you? And the guy, the prisoner told him, he's helping us, not like you, asshole. So that really pissed him off. And then he said, would you be willing to take another MMPI? And the guy said, yeah, I'd be willing to take it. He took it. It turned out to be a valid MMPI. It was valid, and it showed that the guy was no longer psychotic. So here was as close to proof positive as you could get, and that made them even more furious when they saw that he's doing something in there that we don't like. He doesn't have our permission to do it. So they made my life hell, and I was close to retirement there, so I just bought out a chunk of my retirement and I just hit the ejection seat after 18 years working with. But the prison that was a good place to do investigation because at the state hospital, there was one time when I was asking these guys about their voices, and the voices showed up. They didn't like it. They had the guy go talk to the psychiatrist and tell the psychiatrist that I was asking questions about his voices that he didn't like and that he was being upset by me. So at the state hospital, because psychiatrists, and my assumption is that psychiatrists were getting beat up regularly, but the unwritten rule in the state hospital was that you don't do anything to upset a schizophrenic unless you absolutely have to. If you have to stop them from hurting somebody or doing something like that. But otherwise, you don't do anything to upset them, because psychiatrists were getting beat up and they didn't know why. Even after 15 or 20 minutes, they were getting pounded. So that was the unwritten rule. So this guy went to the psychiatrist. He said, this guy's asking me questions about the voices. I don't like it. He's upsetting me. The next morning, I got called up into the psychiatrist office and told, you will stop asking these kind of questions. You're reinforcing these hallucinations and you're making them worse. You're making the patients worse by asking them these kinds of questions. You're upsetting them. They're hallucinations, and that's all they are. So, you don't stop. We're going to do something about it.
Interesting.
So they didn't even want you asking about it. They didn't want you looking into it at all. And something like that happened twice while I was at that hospital. So I had to keep a real low profile there. I couldn't upset these guys. It was like having to go in first gear. I was still doing the investigation. I had to tiptoe around it all. I had to make sure I didn't upset these guys, that word didn't get to a psychiatrist, that if, I don't think any of them fully recovered because I didn't know enough then while I was in the state hospital. I was finding patterns.
Okay.
But nobody was fully recovering in the state hospital. That happened in the state prison, when I was working there, where I had a group of schizophrenics voluntarily who would work with me. And we had a deal. I said, I'll help you out as much as I can. You know, I'm interested in finding out what these things are. These guys were just as curious about what they were as I was, you know. So we
Oh, there
had a
you go.
deal.
Yeah.
I'll help you out as much as I can, you know, but what I'm asking is that you tell me in real time what these voices are telling you while we're working together. So I had like this window into their mind about
Oh,
what these things were telling them, you
were
know.
you able to have a conversation with some of these voices through them?
Yeah, yeah, and they were nasty.
I
They
could
didn't
only
want
imagine.
anything to do with me.
Yeah.
You know, they were, so these patterns just kept coming
Oh,
after that.
yes.
The
Yes.
more I
Let's get back to
investigated,
those patterns. Yes.
all right. So they drained energy. We already talked about that. They got louder after sunset. And
Okay.
when the sun went down, they got louder. They got stronger. They were strongest between 3 and 4 in the morning.
Witching
That's when
hours,
the
everyone calls it. Yes.
Yep. That's when they got the loudest. They'd wake the guy up and then they'd start on him, screaming at him, telling him, "You're no good. You're worthless. You're stupid. You know, not let him sleep." They didn't want them to sleep, but if they could keep them from sleeping, that would weaken them, and they would be more suggestible when they were exhausted. You know, they got louder when they were ignored. I remember one psychiatrist being in the office with one of my patients with the psychiatrist. He was asking. Uh, Are you hearing voices? The guy said, yeah. The psychiatrist said, well, just ignore them. They're just hallucinations. You know, so I didn't say anything. I didn't know anything about it, about what the effect would be if you ignored them. So I brought that guy back a week later and I said, you remember I was in the hospital, I was in the psychiatrist's office with you when he told you to ignore the voices. I said, how's that going for you? He said, not well. He said, not well at all. He said they got louder when ignored. So I started asking the other patients, what happens when you ignore them? Consistently, they got louder, you know. So here we go again. Why would a hallucination get louder after sunset? Why would a hallucination get louder when ignored? You know. The next one is they foster self-destructive behavior. They consistently advise their victims to behave in a self-destructive manner to increase conflict, turmoil, and suffering. They sabotage any positive movement on the part of the patient. Their intent is um, for their victims to suffer, you know. And a lot of the times they tell them to kill themselves. You know, they go, "Nobody likes you. You're worthless. Um, just go ahead and end it."
Yeah.
You know, and you
That's
think,
terrible.
well, why would they tell their food source to kill themselves? I didn't know for years. You know, and then one day in comes an email from somebody saying, "I know why they do that." They said because it tears up the entire family. So even though they lose that person, now they've got a mother, a father, sister, brothers, relatives, friends. They're all upset, going, "We should have seen this. We should have done more. Why didn't we catch this? Why didn't we help them more? Why didn't we do something?" So here's this guilt trip being run on all those guys. So here's a whole bunch more loosh coming out of them.
It just expands.
Well,
It just
this expands.
multiplies. Yes.
They foster isolation. One of their main goals is to destroy marriages. They want to destroy positive relationships with friends, marriages, girlfriends, boyfriends. They don't want anybody to be in relationship. They they don't want any interference with what they're doing. So what they want to do is get that person to isolate themselves, just lock themselves in the room so it's just them and the voices. And then the voices have complete access to them. There's no distractions. There's nobody interfering. So they look at parents and relatives who or wives and husbands who are trying to help the person. The voices look at them as enemies. So they tell the schizophrenic that this guy's you can't trust him. They're plotting against you. You know they're trying to do this. They're trying to do that. Don't trust them. Um, just get away from them. And they make themselves such a pain in the ass that when they go in their room and lock themselves in there, it's a relief for the parents or the family. Yeah, just get them away from us so they're not tormenting us. Let them stay in there. And then they hear them talking to the voices in that room. That's one of the worst things they could do, is lock them up and isolate them by themselves, because then there is no interference with what the voices are talking to them about.
Implanting in
There's
them.
no
Yeah.
distraction. Yeah. So they demand the attention of the victims. They will not be ignored. So they maneuver for increased control over the victim. They want more and more control, because the more control they have, the more they can get that person to hurt themselves or other people, or get into trouble. All right. They gaslight. They're um, there was one patient who, he was on heavy meds, and the voices had convinced him that he had murdered somebody. And he was so confused that he wasn't sure whether he had done that or not. You know, so he couldn't go turn himself into the cops, because then they would know he was nuts and they'd lock him up. On the other hand, he wasn't sure he didn't murder somebody, and the voices were telling him the cops were looking for him. So every time he heard a siren, the voices would start screaming, "You better go hide. They're coming for you. Here they are. They're looking for you." And that would generate a lot of negative emotion. So he was
Oh
like
yeah.
in catch 22. It was like this hell that he could not break out of.
Wow. That is intense.
Yeah,
You
so
just yeah.
they gaslight, and they're liars. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. Nothing. I had one patient where they told him, if you gouge out your eye, we will disappear and we will never come back. And he did it. He gouged out his eye. The
No.
next thing you know, the voices returned and they started laughing at him and mocking him, saying, "Look how stupid you are. You trusted us. Now you're a deformed monster. You know, you're ugly as hell. Nobody's going to want to look at you. You look awful. You're you're worthless. Now you're ugly on top of that." Just started into him at all. So you can't believe anything they say. So for those of you who are listening who have schizophrenic relatives or friends, you can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com and go to articles. And under articles, there's a program called the That's a Lie program. Okay. That will weaken the voices if it's put to use. So basically, if you don't believe what these voices are telling you, they can't get it, their claws in you. So that program's free. Just go under articles and look up a That's a Lie program.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm
So
gonna
they
I'll put that
manipulate.
up on the screen here right now so everybody can see that as well.
Okay. They manipulate perception. They're capable of causing the victims to misinterpret situations and information wrongly that goes against themselves. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They can go up there and pull out every rotten thing that you've ever done. They demand that the victim not tell others about their presence. They don't want the schizophrenic telling anybody about them. They don't want them talking about them. I remember one time when I was working psych crisis in one of the emergency rooms in Tucson. I walk into work one day, and here's this gal laying on one of the psych beds. I don't never saw her before. Didn't say anything to her. Went to the computer and talked to the psych nurse who assigned who we were going to be working with. She was one of the people I was assigned to that day. And when I brought her into the interview room, she said, right off the bat, she said, "As soon as you walked in, the voices told me that you were dangerous and to stay away from you." And I had never seen her before in my life. You know, so
They
that
know. They know.
they know. Yeah. There was another one that told when I was asking him questions, the voices came and they said, "Don't tell him anything else. He already knows too much."
Mm. Yeah,
That was weird.
definitely.
Now, is
Definitely.
that something a hallucination would do?
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Would a new hallucination manipulate perception consistently in a negative direction?
And by manipulating perception, you mean perception on like what I can actually see or what I believe?
What you believe you see.
Oh, okay. Both,
And,
yes.
all right, like a bunch of, you're walking along the sidewalk and a bunch of people across the street start laughing. The voices are going to tell you they're laughing at you because you look funny, you know, or some other reason. Um, they're consummate liars. They lie about everything. They continually steer the victim away from anything that would give them pleasure or joy. It, unless it's drugs, unless it's dangerous drugs, right? But relationships, um, humor. They can't stand people watching humor. Funny stuff, making jokes, that kind of stuff. They don't like any of it. You know, they can manipulate feeling without even speaking. So you're just sitting there, you're feeling okay, and then all of a sudden you have this heavy, negative, depressive feeling. Like, where did that come from?
Yes.
That's them.
Like, I feel that a lot of people all demonstrate certain aspects of these patterns and these signs. Maybe they're not fully schizophrenic, but like I watch comedy shows like on YouTube or something like that, and there's always like this heckler or someone who stands up and they just they're so upset at these comedians telling certain jokes, and it's kind of like you're not getting it, and it's like maybe it is something inside of them that's telling them like to hate these things, or the people with they say they have crippling social anxiety, they can't be out with other people. It all seems that there is a lot more of this going on that's really out there that's not fully evolved into schizophrenia, but it seems to be shades of it.
Yeah, that is shades of it. And like I said, they hit everybody. They don't just hit schizophrenics. Schizophrenics, you can see it much more clearly, you know. And like I said, those of you who are working with schizophrenics, go and get this list. It's on articles on my website also, and see it for yourself. If they're running consistent, repeatable patterns, they cannot be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia is insisting that they are. That's bullcrap. This is something very different. You know, um, they pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. All right. So I've had a number of patients ask these things: "Who are you? What are you?" Guess what they told them?
I'm
Take a
you.
guess. I'm you. I'm you. They want the patient to believe that these negative voices are who they are. If they get you to believe that, they got you.
Yeah,
And it's
they
a
can stay
lie.
because they can
It's
stay in
another lie.
hiding, right? It's kind of like they're incognito.
Right.
They don't have to
And
fully manifest. We're just hide in plain sight
they,
almost, and
yep,
you
they
don't
hide
know.
among all your other thoughts, and then they throw some negative thoughts in your thought stream. When something comes up that's subject to interpretation, they'll have you interpret it in the worst possible manner. You know, so they also can have you selectively forget stuff. When I was passing out the 23rd Psalm, the next week, you know, 2/3 of the people who I passed them to had lost that Psalm, or they would forget to use it. You know, or the That's a Lie program, they would forget to use it. That they want to destroy every positive self concept you have of yourself. Um, they will attempt to pull the patient away from consensual reality that we all believe into another different reality, that's much darker. And the darker it gets, the more negative energy that it generates. Um, they use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. It's a hypnotic technique. They will confuse the person and go, "Oh, well, they're reacting that way because you're ugly or you're stupid or you said something wrong." You know, and that they will use that explanation as why you're feeling confused. You know, any attempt to inform the schizophrenic that the voices are energetic parasites draining them will trigger a volatile reaction from the voices. So if you go to tell them that, you better be prepared for a very negative, strong negative reaction.
Wow. Yeah, that patient probably is having to deal with that as you're telling them that, and then they're saying that, or they're believing that, and that would just cause like almost a medical or like a mental emergency almost of sorts. Like this happening would be just intense.
You know what I have here is I have a page that a schizophrenic gal sent me that talked about her story. Yeah, it's about one page. Let me go get my glasses so I can see that. I'll be right back. I'll read it to you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay, let's have at it.
She says, I'm a 38-year-old female. I want to share my experience with other dimensional beings with you as you're someone who seems to understand. I've been managed with medication with palpable symptoms. She said, now I had 3 to 4 occurrences of psychotic breaks, the first of which I believe was triggered by consumption of marijuana. For about a year, nonstop, I used recreational drugs occasionally before and believe this is what opened me up to psychosis, along with a generally negative state of mind. It was not in my immediate family. Okay, so she said there is no genetic anything. The last 3 times I was prone to this because I stopped taking my meds because they were awful, just like I told you. In 2021, I will try to write them down, and excuse me if it seems all a bit confusing, but I suppose you heard it all uh, throughout the years. She said in 2018, I had my first psychotic break. I was living with my boyfriend and then consumed copious amounts of marijuana. The psychosis creeped up in me very slowly. I had delusions at first, causing me to become paranoid. Um, I'm paranoid that my sister's boyfriend was out to harm her. I rushed into the backyard at one point and hit the lawn with my bare fist, screaming, you can't kill me. I'm already inside you." That's interesting.
That is very interesting.
Okay. Um, she said she saw her aura turn bright red, and she said I gasped into the air, trying to remotely grip the heart of my sister's boyfriend. However, what I felt was my own heart almost stopping. Then a blue light appeared from the sky and disarmed me. That's interesting. She said sometime after that, after a chat with a friend, I insulted a well-known female political figure, and immediately I saw a reddish, mostly black giant eye in my right field of vision, angrily looking at me. And all I could think of at that point was, uh-oh, I done did it now, followed by intense fear. However, I was of the persuasion at that point that if that thing saw me, I also saw it. Then the psychosis started, and it was fear, the purest form of fear. I cannot even fathom to describe, uh, not not of death, but of torture and dissolving into nothingness. At one point, I sat on my boyfriend's couch while he was trying to calm me down with some calming music, and I was sitting there with my head tilted backwards as if I felt and saw an entity stuck something out of my pineal gland or suck something out of my pineal gland, which left me slumping forward. She said the entities told me it was more of a thought than a voice, so they sound like thoughts, to drink, eat my bodily excrements, which I vehemently denied. So I've actually seen them listen to the voices and follow that and do that. Okay. She said, I vehemently declined. So they made it appear as if food tasted differently, and I was suspecting the family of my boyfriend of trying to poison me when we had lunch together. Having full on delusions, I woke up one morning and turned on my PC, and I saw all my favorite YouTubers have videos of them maniacally laughing and giving each other electroshocks to the head. So I forced the shutdown button, which was the most vivid visual I had. This all didn't seem to have an end until I ended up abroad with my mother, whom I have told, uh, who I have told that my then boyfriend was sex trafficking me while I slept, which is a common delusion caused by entities. I was miserable up to that point where I got my hands on my phone and headphones and listened to uplifting music. Now, the lyrics of the music were commanding my thoughts, and I selected uplifting songs, went for long walks in the wooded areas, and smiled and danced a lot. One day, my mom wouldn't let me go outside as it was getting dark. I suppose I wanted to go out for a walk. The intrusive thoughts told me to hit her in the face, but she was wearing glasses, so instead I hit the fire alarm, which alerted the police, and I was brought to the hospital there and given an injection of which that calmed me down, but I was still very much out of it. I don't remember much, but I later made it safely back home alone via bus. A few things happened, and there I remember I spent 40 days in police custody prison where I got prescribed Haldol, which is a major antipsychotic drug. She said, I didn't like the medications they put me on in 2021. I stopped taking them, and in about 4 months, the psychosis started creeping back slowly. So here it is again. They're not getting at the cause of what's causing the mental
Yes.
illness. They're just treating the symptoms. You
Yeah.
stop taking the pills, it comes back. They don't know what the cause is. They're not looking for it.
Do you think that maybe the pills are maybe kind of like, I know they have so much other side effects and it's very negative, but almost like they put up like a temporary shield of blocking for that time being? Is that, or like almost
they
like a,
they they
Mhm.
numb the guy down.
Okay. Okay.
They turn him into a hollowed out feeling zombie.
Yeah.
So
So he
they're
doesn't
just
have these
walking
high
around, just
emotions.
zoned out.
So he doesn't have these high emotions that maybe these
No,
archons can actually feed off of. So maybe
right.
that is why okay, we need to go find someone else that we can feed off because we can't get that
No, the
leash.
first they
Yeah.
tell them to stop taking the drugs because they don't like the drugs. They don't want them taking drugs because they can't get them furious. They can't get them really paranoid and psychotic. They don't. The drugs are interfering with that, so they will tell them not to take the drugs. Right. So she said, my first obsession with numbers and car registrations, and then evil mania like thought patterns emerged, convincing me I was evil and in the service of these beings as a satanic super soldier. I liked the way they made me feel all important and that kind of stuff. So the voices are making her feel important. So I acted out, sent horrifying videos I found on the internet to the police, drank alcohol and energy drinks called hell, and desecrated a painting of Jesus on the throne I had made earlier with occult symbols. I've seen that before too. I started walking on the street feeling invincible at the time as cars avoided me. One night I tried to steal a beer from my store and got the police called on me, which caused me to burst into laughter and act completely out of character. The police came and I didn't try to run or hide. They took me into their car and drove me to the middle of town in front of an abandoned building to find my way back home as they thought I just needed to sober up. However, I ended up going the other way and ended up spilling um, diesel onto the floor of a gas pump. I remember the look the second I threw a cigarette butt onto the puddle. I remember the look on the staff's faces. That was pure horror. The puddle did not light up and no harm was caused. So it was diesel. If it had been gasoline, it would have been a different story, you know. So no harm was caused, luckily. I was out of it, just laughing, even waiting for the police to come for me. And one of the policemen called, this is going to be prison time. I still laughed all the way to the police station. They put me in a cell to sober me up for 12 hours as they thought I was just drunk. Anyway, after that, I was released and went back home. There, I couldn't sleep. They don't want you to sleep. and I had the most vivid recollection of these entities trying to get into my bed. They would lie to me, seducing me with all sorts of lies, and let them into my head, but I would say no. They seemed old, very old beings. They seemed to hover above me as I was listening to music. This time the music was much darker than the last time. I could see them as smoky apparitions. And I've heard several people say, yeah, they looked like pouring black ink into water. You know, uh, this all lasted since the June of 2021 until September 2021, when my mom came home to visit and called the police. As I locked myself in the house, my mother called the police and I was admitted for 4 months, then released for 10 months, where I took the medications as prescribed and was stable but zombified. So basically, she said they turned me into a zombie. I was stable, but I was a zombie. Then the court order came for the police to take me to a special mental hospital in another town for an unknown amount of time. I took my phone and some stuff with me and went with them. I spent the better part of the last 3 years in a psych ward for people who have committed crimes involving murder. It was an all female ward. It was a hellish experience. However, I was treated well because I was polite, well mannered, took part in art therapy, and respected the staff and doctors. I was mostly in good spirits and didn't let the environment bother me too much. Made a couple of friends there, tried to make them laugh almost every day, and I tried to make the best of it. I did not commit any crime. However, I put other people at risk with my behavior in the last occurrence of psychosis, so that is why I was admitted. The doctors wanted me out of there after 4 months. However, I had psychosis, so that is why I was admitted. Um, uh, the doctors wanted me out of there. I had worked there and I had nobody to take me out of there. So after 2 years, with the help of a social worker couple who uh, worked there, I was one of four let out of about 1,000 patients who were accepted uh, into the hospital's halfway house program. I spent 7 to 8 months in the halfway house waiting for my parent to get me out of there. However, they were stalling, and I was slowly losing my patience. Suddenly, one day at the beginning of July, I began seeing double after reporting this to the head nurse. They sent me to get a CT scan done. The doctor consulted two neurologists who confirmed that there were changes in my brain that warranted investigation, probably from those drugs, for which I had to be sent back to my hometown hospital neurology unit. Things didn't go as planned. I was sent to the psych unit of the hospital in my own hometown, where I had a spinal tap done and was released home with my cousin, who agreed to help as he lives in the same town. Under incredible circumstances of seeming uh, coincidence, being a law that didn't recognize IMO, I am home now, my sight almost completely recovered, and able to talk about my experiences. I told myself I want to help people in these kind of wards with a book or otherwise. I'm agnostic, but I lean towards Gnostic Christian perspective, and I believe in the existence of beings who feed on loose negative energy of people. Uh,
Jeez.
yeah.
And so
So
the bottom line for this all, Jerry, is that we are being fed on by these demons, these acons, whatever you want to call them. They are out there, and they're manifesting much more with the schizophrenia. They have a much more easy access to it, but they are
they hit
out there.
everybody.
Yeah, they hit
You
everyone.
know, you could be walking down the street and just minding your own business, and they say smack that guy in the back of the head. Or I had one guy write me. You have to listen to one of these videos. He said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I was standing in back of my boss the other day, you know, and they had this voice boom into my head to spit on the back of his head. It came out of nowhere. You know, and that's when you're standing on a high bridge. Kind of like I wonder what it would be like to jump. You
Yes.
know, I had one preacher. This was a really holy guy. He was a very good guy. He's standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, hearing voices telling him to jump.
Jeez.
So they hit us all. Hey, why don't you drive into oncoming traffic? Stuff like that. Or that guy really insulted you. You ought to do something.
Yes. Yeah.
So
You're saying a lot of these patterns when you were talking earlier, you're talking about some of these patterns and some of the things I'm like, I've experienced that before. I know I'm not I'm not a schizophrenia. I don't have psychosis, but some of those things I'm like, yeah, like when you talked about black ink hitting water, that look, I've seen two things like that in my life. I have seen that before. And, it's kind of like these, okay, I, I, I knew that they weren't my buddies. They weren't my friends. There's something evil. But yeah, that's exactly like the one was identical. Like I called it black smoke. It was all up in the corner of a room kind of thing, moving all around.
yeah. Yep,
The other one,
I've talked to several people who saw that same thing.
Jesus. Yeah, this was, and this had to do with a scenario. I was with my ex-wife at the time, and her daughter was extremely sick for like a month. No doctor could diagnose her. No one. And they were like, she was extremely weak, no energy. And they were like, literally, one doctor yelled at her that like was yelling at her like, "No, you're faking it. You're faking it."
Mm.
Well,
Yeah, they
wow.
say the regular doctors, they don't understand anything about this. When I was working doing psych crisis in the emergency rooms of these big hospitals around Tucson, all those doctors wanted was us to get those psych patients out of the ER. They didn't want us working with them. They wanted them out of there because they didn't know what to do with them. Right? So, the only thing that psychiatry knows what to do is drug them. And regular therapy. I mean, I've gone through 8 years of higher education, and 40 years of in-service training of all kinds, and none of that works with schizophrenics. Using regular counseling techniques with schizophrenics is like trying to shoot a rhino in with a BB gun in the butt to get it to move. It doesn't work. But regular psychotherapy is very inefficient. It doesn't work well at all. But about 15, 20 years ago, up comes a guy named John Mace. This guy was a ship captain, and he was fascinated with the mind. He wanted to know how the human mind worked. And so he had plenty of time to read. He read philosophy, he read psychology, he read everything. Plus, he had to know a lot about energy with running a big ship like that. You had to know, the resistance of the water and the navigation and magnet stuff and the way energy flowed or electricity. Had to know a lot about, energy, of different kinds of energy. And he was able to make the leap between the energy he was seeing dealing with his ship and that of people. Okay. So he saw that people were energy, that it's energy that drives your body. He also found that the mind isn't what people thought it would. The mind only takes pictures of where you put your attention. Everything else is done by the spirit. You're reasoning, you're talking, you're studying, everything else is done by the spirit. But your mind only takes pictures of where you put your attention. And attention is energy also. Mm-hmm. So Mace found a way to connect a negative identity. So what happens when most psychological problems are caused by some kind of trauma, right? And what happens in a trauma is there's a really bad feeling, and that feeling stays around for a long time. And at the same time as that that bad feeling came about, there's a decision that the person makes about how they related to that trauma. All right. So you say something happened to this person when they were 6 years old, and they felt because of what their mother said or their mother did, they got the message that they were worthless because of this trauma. So that felt bad, and it stays there forever. So the ego shows up and it goes, okay, this has been going on long enough. It's interfering with your functioning. We need to get rid of it. So it takes it and it throws it in your subconscious mind and then battens it down so it can't get out. It's not dead. It's still alive in there. Okay. So here's this bad feeling with the belief that you are worthless stuck in your subconscious. So what happens every time somebody shows up who is similar to the person who caused that trauma in the first place, that thing goes off like a landmine. Because that person's way too close. Either beat them up, attack them, or run, or avoid them, but get away from them. And this is like the person you hate. It's like no matter where you go, that person you hate shows up. You can go from here to China and a Chinese person like that person you hate will show up. Okay. That's because they're out there and this thing is reacting to them. So Mace found a way to go in there, get that negative energy out of there, drain it. Okay. So his this therapy is like you get a brand new car battery, you charge it full, then you drain it down to nothing. So there's no electricity in it at all. That battery is a boat anchor. You can't charge it up again. It's dead and you can't bring it back. Okay. So what Mace found was there's a way to hook up that trauma, that's feeling from the trauma, to a structure that will lead to a path where it gets drained. That energy gets drained.
Like grounding it all, like
Well,
kind of like
what it
grounding
does,
a hard reset almost.
Well, it doesn't just ground it; it transforms it into positive potential.
Okay.
And it's called the Mace energy method. It traumas that have been there for years can be gone in an hour.
Wow.
You go, like the person who something happened to them when they were 6 years old. There was this 78-year-old lady that had that trauma that came up. Her spirit chose that trauma to work with, for one. So there's two spiritual points where this, regular psychotherapy has no spiritual anything to it at all. Nothing. It's all intellectual horse crap. This has two spiritual points. One spiritual point picks out the trauma for the person. Right. The second one, the spirit actually transfers that negative energy into positive energy. Right? So when the process is done, and in an hour, that trauma is gone. It's drained. It's like the dead battery. So you can ask the person, okay, I want you to go back to that trauma now. Back to that same room where this thing happened. How do you feel about it now? They go, neutral. It doesn't bother me. Gone in an hour. It's called the Mace energy method. You can read about it on my website. I got several videos on it.
I'm
It's
definitely
cutting edge
looking
stuff.
into this. Yeah, I think so. I think this is something that would benefit the world. Not just.
Well, it would, but they don't want it out there.
Of course not.
They don't want it out there. They don't want something that actually gets rid of the cause.
Yes.
Yes. So they call this thing causism because it gets to the cause of the psychological problem and dismantles it. That's not what psychiatry does. It pours drugs on your brain and goes, okay, now you feel like a zombie. You feel better than you did, right? Oh, yeah, I'm a zombie.
I can't feel anything. Yes.
I can't feel anything. That's okay. Better than feeling bad stuff. Yeah, all right.
Wow.
No,
Jerry,
so,
this
it's cutting edge stuff.
Yes. And I'm glad that you were providing I don't want to say cure because I don't want to say that, but you providing a solution,
yes,
for this. And I think we could all take advantage of that solution, myself as well. I've already been Googling it. I was like, okay, let me check out this Mace energy method because that is something that I think I can benefit from because there's a lot of things that I see that are these symptoms that you're talking about. Yeah. I'm like, yep. Like, this is a lot of things, I have a lot of these things, where you hear people laughing sometimes and I'm like, were they laughing at me? Do I have something funny kind of walking, and you I almost think it's sometimes human. I don't know. I don't want to say that. A lot of times we play ourselves down. We're like, oh, I can't believe you did that, or we get these flashbacks of things that we did in high school. And you're like, oh my God, that was so embarrassing. Why did I do that?
That's them.
And that's
That's
them.
them.
That's not normal. That's not how
No,
a normal person's
no.
supposed to be.
See,
Like, yeah.
psychiatry and psychology never ask where thoughts come from.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's mind or brain. Nobody's found a thought in the brain, ever.
Yeah, where do they originate from? That
Where
is
do
a
they
great thing.
originate from?
And is it yours?
A Christian mystic called Emanuel Swedenborg 300 years ago found out. He was given access to heaven and hell. Right? And he was the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden. He was probably one of the most educated people on the planet at that time. He studied all kinds of stuff. He had all kinds of inventions. He was like the Swedish Leonardo da Vinci. And at age 50, Jesus showed up and said, okay, I want you to stop all this science stuff. I'm going to give you access to heaven and hell. And I want you to go talk to the people in those places and then write about it and inform the people on the planet what these places are like. Right? So here I am reading about that. And, here is these voices that I've been studying that match exactly the negative entities that Swedenborg was talking about
In hell.
in hell. They're the same things. They act the same way. They're same consistent liars, cheaters, scum.
Wow. We are being manipulated by hell,
Yeah, we are.
by things from hell to weaken us so that they can feed off of us.
Well, like the Bible said, it's our fight is against, it's not against flesh and blood. It's against the minions of evil.
We are in a spiritual battle.
Yes, and a big one right now.
1,000,000%. And people need to start to realize that is what is happening out there. Like the big event that just happened with Charlie Kirk, when Charlie Kirk was murdered,
Yeah.
Like the reactions by a lot of people were very
you can
peculiar.
see which ones are evil from their reaction to that.
Yes.
It's very clear which ones are just evil.
You could be neutral about it. That's fine. If you're neutral, I don't know this person. I'm not going to, but there's still that sympathy you could have for that person.
Right. And their family.
Yes. And their family. But it's not. It is like dancing and joyous and celebration. That is disgustingly evil. And
yes, those people are sick.
Yes. And
you look at Kamala Harris as one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Almost trying to become the president of the United States. Can you imagine that? If she got in, this country would be doomed. Forget it.
Yeah, I believe so. I think everybody needs to straighten up, and we have to stop being so blinded as well. It doesn't matter which side. Like, we have to call out evil wherever evil is, even if it's on your political spectrum or on their political spectrum. I think we have to accept it that is there, and quit turning a blind eye to it. Quit ignoring it. Quit.
Yes.
It is all there.
Yeah, like Antifa.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like Soros.
I had my own, people are like, oh, Antifa is anti-fascist. No, Antifa is fascist. Just because they have a name that's like, I'm going to put a name on, like I'm not evil, and then I'm going to be evil. But he's not evil. He's got that name. No, this is what they're doing. I was fighting for my freedom, I will say, 5 years ago during something crazy. I'm not going to mention that, but who was I fighting against? One of the things was when I was out, marching for my freedom, was Antifa. Antifa was trying to stifle my freedom. They were trying to constrain me. They're trying to suppress me. They're trying to, restrict me. That's not anti-fascist. That's fascism.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Jerry, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciated this. And normally my shows only go for maybe an hour and 15, hour and 20 at most. This is going and going, and I could keep going. It just, unfortunately, because with this program that I'm using, I'm only allowed 2 hours. So I don't want to go too much longer and overextend that. But Jerry, can you give, two things? Tell everybody where they can find you. And then also one last parting words, if you could, because I feel that you are a wealth of knowledge that I think you could give some people some support that maybe they need right now.
Well, if I had to say one thing to watch out for is watch the thoughts that are coming into your mind. Swedenborg says none of your thoughts are your own. They either come in from heaven or hell. Your brain is like a radio receiver. It picks them up. It's tuned to whatever frequency you're tuned to. So you got these Antifa guys, you got these guys like Camellia Harris that were happy that, about the murder. They're tuned to a very low level, very low frequency. So those negative thoughts are going to keep coming into her head. Nobody asks where thoughts come from, and you don't have to entertain them. Okay. So what these things are doing, they're putting negative thoughts in your head. If you entertain them, you're giving them energy. If you go, oh, I did that in high school and that was awful. And oh man, I feel bad about it now. And that's disgusting. And you're feeding it.
It's just cancer.
And they're getting, yeah, well, don't, you can't force it because what you resist persists. Let it go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
Don't feed it.
Okay.
There's no law that says you have to let every rotten thought that you have make a home in your mind, because these things are putting in rotten thought after rotten thought, and they are sly. Some of them are really dumb, but there's some that are so sly and so cunning that it is almost unbelievable.
It's like you said, they're fishing, they're throwing out the bait, waiting to see you to grab on hold of it. And I have been, when I have these thoughts, and a lot of times it's in the shower. You're having these thoughts in the shower. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And in 8th grade, when I was in art class and I did this, and you're like, oh, no, just let it go. Just let it go. Okay. Yeah. And so, Jerry, where can everybody find you?
Well, they can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com.
Okay.
There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of information under the articles. There's information about the MACE energy method there and how to access an appointment for that. There's stories there. There's probably 100 videos there. There's all kinds of information about this stuff there.
Perfect. And I think you also mentioned That's a Lie, right? As well, the That's a Lie program.
That's a Lie program is under articles.
All right. So people, go check that out. Go check Jerry out. I think this is something we all need to do. The MACE energy method as well. I'm definitely looking into that after we're done this interview, going on, and I'm going to be looking into that. So Jerry,
well, I'll tell you what, you just hang on after you sign off, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit.
Okay, perfect. So Jerry, I want to say thank you so much for spending the time passing on this information, because this was extremely interesting and something that I'm becoming more and more passionate about as well. I think everything is connected. We got to stop looking at that, and we have to start dealing at the root causes. My wife tells me that all the time. You got to go deeper. You got to go deeper. Don't look at the surface stuff. You got to go deeper as to why these things are happening. And it's fascinating. I'm allowing these things in. I'm humoring these thoughts, and I got to stop that. So, Jerry, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we were able to finally get on after all that.
After all that issues. Yes.
Something was trying to stop us.
Exactly. But here we are. We made it work. All right. Thank you, Jerry. Okay, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Jerry. Like I said, Jerry and I are going to get together again here in the near future, and we're going to do the MACE energy method. And I'm really excited about this. I think it's something that can deal with a lot of issues for me, for you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a follow-up interview where I'm going to have a session prior to that interview, and then we're going to break it down, what happened, how it all went. And I really hope you guys are interested in it, because let's be honest. Let's stop taking pills. Let's stop covering up the root causes. Let's stop throwing Band-Aids over things that are just like gashes. There's gashes in our mental health, in our spirituality. And we're just like, Band-Aid? No, let's deal with it. Let's go down to the root cause and deal with the stuff. Okay? And I hope you all join me on this. I'm really looking forward to it. And as always, everyone, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the Codex flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the Codex flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strange begins. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Giants, cryptids that come